I will probably get sued or banned or copyright striked for this video. So today we are talking about Charlotte De Witte. She is a very famous Belgian DJ, a techno DJ. And now you're asking yourself maybe, why do I make a video about techno DJ? Because she released a Psytrance EP about a year ago. And as you can see, she ranks very, very well for techno. So I would say she is a really like #1 DJ in techno, and one of her top original tracks is actually a Psytrance track. Today we will have a deep look into this track and to check out what makes this track so special, if it's a cool thing to have like a techno Psytrance fusion style, and I also want to take a look what I would do different and also what I can learn for my own production from this. Also, we will address some of the most important questions people ask. Is Charlotte De Witte married? I will solve this at the end of the video, so keep watching. What's wrong with you guys? Why is the most asked question, is Charlotte De Witte married? Does the internet community want to make a proposal maybe? So I bought the track here on Beatport and I imported it into my DAW. So here we have the track laid out for you guys. I already did the analysis as good as I can. And there's a lot of things which surprised me and which I want to talk with you about today. Let's start with some few basic things. The first thing is, as a fusion track between techno and psytrance, I would say it's a little bit more on the techno side. It has a few psytrance elements and it has a few techno style things. And I want to point out where they differ and where they merge. So let's start first with the arrangement. So as we can see, it has one break here in the middle, so that's quite common, I guess, probably in techno and psytrance. And we have like a section which goes more into the break, and we have two parts. So that's basic, very, very raw view on the arrangement. And the next thing I noticed, everything is very well placed in 16 bars blocks. So I will play a little bit through the track, so that you can hear that whenever, so you see this marker, this loop here is 16 bars. By the way, if you haven't heard that track, I will link to the track up here so that you can hear it in the original YouTube version, which is uploaded from Charlotte De Witte. And whenever I move this, you will notice a major change in the track. So the first part here basically is an intro, and then we go from the intro in our first groove. So we have our first hat, it's a closed hat in the offbeat position. I will play through all the block here. I will always play from half to half, and you should get a good impression how the first block and how the second block sound. And also here, our grid sound start, which I will come later to, which I think are very, very static during the track, but I will explain why this works later. So let's go a bit further. So we have here our first hat in the off position, and now in the next section we start with the leads and we get some more shaker vibes to it, so more like hi-hats or shaker things. I think it's hi-hats, which basically make that taka 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 thing, which is kind of like permanent all the time. One very important thing which I also want to point out here in this section, the bassline changes a little bit, which is, I think, quite uncommon for Psytrance to modulate the bassline, because it's trance. We want to usually have like a very stable bassline besides kind of like bringing in new notes, but it's not very common, and it surprised me a lot. And I think it could be still a cool concept for Psytrance if you're a bit open to new concepts. So I think that's something really nice to notice. Notice how it kind of opens up, but it's not filtered. It's more like getting more square type-ish, I would say. And here in that block we get the main vocal coming, which also is the main theme of the track, and which is, to be honest, really cool, I think. That's actually the element I love most about this track, which makes it really nice. I hope you noticed there was a change in that bass line thing. It's not really a pattern change, it's more a modulation thing. And as you can see, we're still moving 16 bars here. And now we come from the vocal part into another part, which I will play a little bit longer from here to here, is another part which is also 16 bars, but it kind of like adds a little block to the block before, and then it adds this little break, and it perfectly makes then the transition into the next block, falling on the 16 bar grid here. And one thing which I also want to announce, this block was used to go from this offbeat closed hat to a more open hi-hat. I'm not sure if it's just like a modulation. First I thought the drum is getting louder, but it's not only that. It's more in volume, I guess, but it's also more open. This one here is more like staccato. It makes tuck 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 tuck, and this one makes more like like an open, more open hat actually. Compare that. Or better, if you don't want to have all that shakers in here, compare this. So I think that's a nice idea, as the whole track kind of like really blends elements, and that's something which I think is very psychedelic in that track, that the changes in it was actually, I had a hard time analyzing this, because on a lot of elements I wasn't sure. For example, on the bassline change, I didn't really expect that, and I thought at some points there's like an acid melody coming in, but it wasn't. It was just like a modulation on something else, and we find this kind of like modulations more in the track, and I will explain more to it later as well. But now let's continue. So we go from here, from our little break build up thing, into also like a faster groove. So notice that we have this more faster going drums on. Then the block ends with filtering out again, and then we go into a bit more plain section coming from that kind of like nice vocalish thing, and we come into a bit more gritty plain section again. That, for example, was a section where I was thinking, is there like an acid coming in somewhere? And then we go into a next section in which we start fading out and preparing for the break. And we're still everything 16 bars here. And there's one thing here, which I believe is something which I actually didn't mark down, but I think it's like a vocal chop or delay or reverb reversed. I hear something, but as I said, it's really melted into the track. It's not so obvious. It's more like a huh, 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 huh. You hear like a gated vocal thing, or repeated vocal thing, which makes like huh, 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 huh. And I think it's preparing for the next thing, in which we get the vocal back here, but very filtered also. So it makes very smooth transition, and that's something which I really appreciate in this track, that it has. Coming from my production, where I really have this huge build-ups like drum fills, kick rolls, risers, sound risers, and then announcing stuff a little bit more obvious, I would say. I do filter and stuff, but this is like really like, it's not second row, it's like third row thing. If you don't really notice it at the first moment. You really need to listen, and then still you need to ask yourself, did I hear this track maybe a bit too often and I'm just like making this up in my mind, or is it actually there? And that's very psychedelic in my opinion. I don't know if you noticed, but the vocal starts filtered with reverb and everything on it, and gets more clear and a little bit louder over here. So I think it's really bringing that track nicely down here, and then we are building up here again until we drop again. We are returning here to our more closed offbeat head thing, which we also had here in the beginning. You can actually see it has quite some structures. So you could basically say the track it's not mirrored, it's not the same. That's definitely not. But it kind of like, it starts with that offbeat head, it goes into that open head shaker thing here, and it's just like a little bit differently arranged, but I would say it's quite mirroring this side. Also, when we come later a bit here to the grids and stuff, which I will show later in the video, then you will also see, basically you can see it here visually, that things start to give visual sense and audible as well, of course. So check this out. We getting additional head layer here. So here is not 16 but 8 bars, which is also quite regular grid. That was the part where I asked myself, is there like an asset announced, especially because the bassline changes, and then we have this little effects somewhere here which also have that kind of like asset carry. Here, like bim 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 bim. But maybe it's just like an effects thing. I think I didn't even mark it down. But I think she plays a little bit with that. The bass line, the kick and everything has that kind of like acid squarish sound, and then comes effects and stuff also in. So it's really melted the track really nice here. And then we go into a little break. And what's to notice here, it sounds like she bandpassed it and then moves upwards with the kick and bass, which kind of like gives like a driving momentum there. And in the end, it kind of like disappears here, and in the end she comes down and falls right into the next section. Here we have the same vocal again, but that's something I want to mention, and it's the concept about this track, and we will look later a bit more into it. Everything is heavily modulated. As I said, even the bass line changes, so that's actually the trick, in my opinion, why this works, because the elements, it's not many elements, to be honest, so it's very minimalistic, I would say. Here I have like 16 channels and 3 of them are just my markers. I put like the FX all on one channel, so there's not many elements in there, but the elements are well selected and the elements are well modulated. This could already be the closed one. I'm not 100% sure on that one. What I find very interesting also on the drum things here, she has that little transition fills sometimes. They are usually at the end of the bar or at the beginning of the bar, leaving the first kick out, or sometimes even random in the middle, or not random. There's probably some intention behind them. But notice this, how the drum change is followed by this kind of like little drum fill, which is not ending here. It's going over into the next part here. Or maybe it's even 2. I'm not 100% sure right now. I would need to listen more often. It could also be like... But the intention behind this is to mask over this change, I guess. And as you can hear, she used that head and made it come more to the front. Let's check that here in the analyzer. It's not getting louder, but it changes in sound. Maybe it changes from that open to that closed position. I guess it's a modulated drum as well. So, because it's not really, I don't really see it peaking louder in the mix. Also with the shakers, I have the feeling like they're panned heavily and they come sometimes more front and more back. So that's also like a modulation thing I notice here. And then we kind of like leave the track here with that, with less drums again and with the grids here down. So that's mainly about the raw arrangement. Now I want to dive deeper into some more elements here. To quickly sum it up, she has a very strict 16 bar with some 8 bar blocks pattern here. So there's nothing weird in here, nothing like no extra bars, no like 9 bars and then comes like the next thing. It's very plain, which is probably to get you in that hypnotic vibe. And also I guess techno is probably even more strict without knowing me that, but I would guess because it sounds to me a little bit less wild. Notice there's a lot of modulation as well in the drums as also in the bass, which is quite uncommon for Psytrance, but which I find interesting and could be a try in a track to actually do that. And notice she has that little blending fills, which we noticed, which help to make transitions in the drums. If you like this video so far, then please hit the thumbs up button. That helps me to spread the video. Also, let me know in the comments if you want to go deeper into stuff or if you have a track which you also find very interesting. I want to quickly look over you here on the grids because they are quite stable, to be honest. It actually surprised me. I wouldn't do this like this, but I think in progressive trance, people do that, very stable like this. So we have always this zaps kind of like going up and this zaps going down with a delay tail. So check this out. Bim, 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 bim. And what I found really interesting is she actually repeats the pattern over here, but instead of playing the beginning, she just plays the tail. So you don't have the zap here, but you have. Did you hear that? It's actually a nice trick, I think. If you don't want to bring the element over here, then to kind of like cut the delay tail and just bring the delay tail already here, even if the element never appeared here before. I think that's something interesting to notice. Then I want to quickly compare all the same shots with you. So here we don't notice much modulation. So what she did here, she kind of like left the sample very much in its place, but she did apply different reverbs to it. And for example, here, when everything gets filtered out, it gets also filtered out a bit. There's one thing I noticed. I guess this is the only shot which I found very different from the other ones. It sounds either like there's a second effects coming here, or it has some processing on it. It sounds a little bit more rough. I don't know. If you notice, you can check out the original track at around 221. So if you want to check it out, let me know in the comments what you think, if that is processed differently to all the other ones. Then we have, as a second grid element, we have this thing which she uses basically in every transition here. So always at the end of a block, she has this one, which is blending over. Personally, I find it a bit too much in the front in the mix and a little bit annoying. I think the concept is nice, which she then executed afterward. Because you can hear this thing has a tail. And she uses this tail as a grid element. So it's the tail from this one, which she also uses before the original one comes. And she uses like this at the end of each section, and this kind of like a lot at the beginning of every 2 bars. So you can see she has basically 2 constant grid elements. The zaps here, which always alternate, and then this one which comes here always in this spaces. So that's, I think, also a very cool trick, which I will take into my production to work a little bit more with tails and use, I mean, I do that, but not kind of like as grids and stuff. And I think that could be a very nice little trick, which I have seen or learned from this production. I did mention before the square type, acid type bassline and the kick, and I want to have you a very quick look to it because that's something which I also found looked very interesting. So this is basically, this is the kick, and here we have the bass also then. And as you can see, you can basically, and just as a short explanation for you guys who are less far in our journey here, the lower frequencies have bigger wavelengths. So basically, you can basically see in this wave shape, you can see this one is the lower frequency than this little bumps here. What we can see here in the kick, and this frequency over here is even lower because it's like the cycle here is further, the points are further than if you would look at like a cycle in here, which is also a little bit less clear because it's less static. But what I want to point out is that we have here, and this is not the low end, it's kind of like mid type sound, which makes the sound here, and it has that square shape. So if you have a lot of imagination and can kind of like blend out these higher frequencies, you can basically put this to a square wave, and then at some point where we have then the low end, we blend over into like a sine wave again. So that's something which I think is also a cool idea, which I might take into another track of mine to use a square type kick. I think that's really interesting and pretty cool. I already talked about this before, but I want to go one more time about the drums. So as you can see, it starts with that off beat closed head, goes into that open hi-hat thing, has another offbeat closed head here, open hi-hat, offbeat closed here. So we have that kind of like pattern. It opens, it transforms, it goes away in the break, it opens again, it transforms, it closes. And the same kind of like goes to the shakers. We start with that less aggressive shakers, go to the more aggressive shakers, less aggressive shaker or hi-hat thing, and here the same, but in that kind of like main thing, it's like all layered on top, I guess. And again, this little drum fills is something which is really interesting and I will take into my production because I think it's very nice to not only have that psychedelic shots and ooh-ah and beong and zaps and stuff, if you have that kind of like little fill-ish things in between. And they are not only here in the ends. Check that out, like here. Actually, it starts over here already. Did you know it's very subtle? It's just like kind of like going over. And here it's a little bit more strong in the transitions, I think. And here in the transitions we have it as, or here we have it in the beginning, and it sounds to me like we would have that fast shakers. Maybe those fills are actually from that faster shaker somehow derived or ancestors of it. I don't know. Maybe those fills come even from that faster shaker hi-hat type drums. But I think this is also really interesting how she builds this down. And then it blends into whatever shaker thing is here. So it has that more like sound in the beginning and gets more staccato, kind of like even like if you would fade out a noise in the beginning, like a noise explosion. But last I want to talk about the vocal because this one is also really interesting. So first we have here a pattern in the vocal. It's like this. Hum, da, re, he, hum or something. Like basically here it starts coming again. But notice that there are also some modulations in the vocal which make it keep moving, so it's not the same sample all the time. Check out that this one sounds more vibrato, like more the pitch wiggling. Also, notice the reverb is different. That's something which I think is quite common to in techno. You don't process the sample so crazy like we do sometimes with tantra and whatever stretching algorithms. It's a lot about the sense and the stuff and the mix, how you place things in the mix and how they kind of like float away and come back, which is really hard to analyze, to be honest, for me. It's kind of like this micro modulations in here within a section, but also the whole vocal is modulated heavily during the track. So for example, we have the vocal getting louder here in the beginning. Hope you hear the difference. It's of course filtered out when we do drops and stuff. We also have, for example, the vocal gated over here. This is maybe more a little bit how we would do it in Psytrance. And as already said, placed differently in the mix. So for example, if you compare here, here the reverb is very big and fat because we have space in the break, and here is a little bit less reverb. So you can already play a lot with little things like that in the mix to make it more interesting and to make the elements not appear so much the same. Plus that kind of like a little modulation. Maybe I'm also tricked a bit by the reverb here, but I hear it like a little bit wiggling. Let me know in the comments if you hear it too or not, but that's something I really wanted to point out. And there's one more interesting hack on the vocal, which you can also do with melodies or actually anything, is that the vocal always closes with a different phrase. So basically the vocal is a little bit longer and she cut it into, or maybe she arranged it into some kind of like one bar pattern, and then there comes like a twist at the end. We could say with the reverb it's going over here. You get the idea, it's the same. So that's really cool, and I do that also sometimes with melodies, but something to keep in mind, you can also do that with drums if you like, or with bass lines, or with whatever you like. Finish the section up and make it more round, I would say, and less static. It's a little bit like in a conversation if you have talked phrases and sentences and in the end you say goodbye. That's me. Or like if you're on CB radio and you would say like over and out in the end. So in the end, I would say it's a little bit more on the techno side than on the Psytrance side, this track, but I was quite surprised and I learned a few things from my own production. And there's of course many things I would do differently because I come from a different production side. But anyways, if you think I should do a collaboration with Charlotte De Witte, then spam her email so that she reaches me, because I already tried to email and Instagram her. So if you really want to make me like a collaboration track or a remix of this track, then hit her comments, everything you can, and let me know if that is interesting for you to kind of like disassemble things which are a little bit more out of the box, a little bit more out of the usual things I show. I also want to do this with top Psytrance tracks to show you really how they are built up. And I also want to do this with tracks which are not even related to Psytrance, because maybe we find some interesting things we can then use and apply for our own productions. To sum it up, what really makes and breaks that track is that it has that simplicity. It has that 16 bar or 8 bar patterns. It has no crazy things in there. There's not many like risers and fallers and stuff or weird effects sprinkled all over. It's very simple, very well selected samples and execution and then modulated and arranged in a way to make it interesting. Let me know if you liked it. Boop the like button if you like it and share this video. And to solve the mystery, if Charlotte De Witte is married because you want to make her a proposal, on February 5th, 21, she announced her engagement. So you need to wait until she gets divorced, or you need to find another very famous techno DJ which you can marry. See you next time.